Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Winston time. Hey guys, I just woke up. I should probably take a shower, but I will do that after. Winston. Hello, my name is Connor. Let's get right into it. Original link to the video, top of the description, link to the Discord, right below that, link to my second channel where I do more sports, stand-up stuff, right below that. Let's go. If you aren't ready to learn...
We imagine Winston Churchill.
Get out, please. There's the door. Home ec is down the hall. Make me a mozzarella sticks.
With his signature, we imagine Winston Churchill with his signature cane, drinking Scotch whiskey and puffing on a Cuban cigar. His mouth is downturned and his voice is gruff and his words pointed. This is the image that Hollywood portrays, but it is a mere caricature of the flesh and blood version. So who was Winston Churchill? In Britain,
Merry Christmas, guys. Merry Christmas. Happy December. Who was Winston Churchill?
Hour, Churchill led his country from the brink of Nazi conquest by forging an alliance with the US and Russia. He had many critics and made mistakes on a grand scale, yet above all possessed an unwavering belief in his own power. To his beloved country, he offered his blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Behind the political figure was a family man, a man of literary distinction, an artist, a great lover of pets, and a tinkerer. Yes, Winston Churchill had many hobbies. Today on Biographics, we paint the complex picture of the lion, Sir Winston Churchill.
I'm excited. Phones away. Even if you're watching this on a phone, throw it away. Okay. I'll give it to you after class. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, where's this guy from? Because his accent is just so British Empire. Go.
Sir Winston Churchill was born on November 30th, 1874, into the upper echelons of British society. His father was Lord Randolph Henry Spencer Churchill, a prominent politician and the third son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough. Churchill's mother, Jenny Jerome, was an American beauty and socialite, the daughter of a wealthy New York stockbroker, and Jenny Jerome was an American beauty and socialite, the daughter of a wealthy New York stockbroker and financier. The glamorous couple would seem like a match made in heaven, but they lived mostly apart and carried on separate lives. They also couldn't really be bothered with the young Winston. The very privilege of his pedigree didn't afford him the kind of love and affection that he sought from his parents. Sadly, throughout his life, both father and mother were distant and neglectful. Fortunately, though, for the young Winston, there was one adult in his life who provided emotional support and acted like a mother figure: Churchill's nanny, Elizabeth Everest. Whom, as Winston called her after a failed attempt at saying woman as a child, was hired to care for Winston when he was 1 month old. She would remain his only real friend and confidant throughout his childhood. When she passed away, Churchill said of her, "She had been my dearest and most intimate friend during the whole 20 years I had lived. I shall never know such a friend again." Winston was just 7 years old when he was sent away to St. George's School at Ascot, a boarding school. It was not uncommon for school children in upper class to
That looks like a
St. George to know such a friend again. Winston was just 7 years old.
That looks like a 7-year-old, like a 50-year-old in a 7-year-old's body right there. Just that stare is not. Jesus.
When he was sent away to St. George's School at Ascot, a boarding school. It was not uncommon for school children in upper class society to be sent away, but his mother dropped him off at Paddington Station alone to catch the train. At his first school, Winston was bullied and bruised by the headmaster, who commonly birched the students, a form of corporal punishment that involved striking the bare bottoms of boys that misbehaved. With visible scars.
I was going to say, don't worry, it's part of growing up. Just got to fight back against the other kids, but it's the headmaster.
On Winston from the beatings and pleas from his loving nanny, his parents withdrew him and placed him in the Brighton School in 1882. Winston escaped the brutality of his first school, but not the lessons at Brighton, which he despised. Winston hated the regiments and was rebellious. His poor academic scores and speech impediments, a lisp, made Winston an easy target and subject to ridicule. In 1888, Winston enrolled at the Harrow School, but with abysmal entry scores. He placed at the bottom of his class. At Harrow, Winston excelled in the subjects that interested him, including English and history. He also demonstrated a prowess for the sport of fencing, winning the public school's fencing championship. Yet the few bright spots were overshadowed by deep sadness. Winston recalled, "In retrospect, those years form not only the least agreeable, but also the only barren and unhappy part of my life." Winston Churchill nearly died from a self-imposed act of bravado at the age of 18 when he jumped off a bridge. He would later endure 3 days of unconsciousness, a ruptured kidney, and 3 months in bed. It happened
Into water, I'm guessing, right?
when the teenager was playing chase with his 12-year-old brother Jack and his 14-year-old cousin while vacationing at their aunt's estate. According to Churchill, in his 1930 memoir, he was trapped on a rustic bridge with brother at one end and cousin at the other. Rather than be captured, Churchill leapt from the bridge, aiming for a pine tree to slide down. He greatly misjudged the distance and fell the full height onto hard ground. Churchill was extremely lucky to survive, but it wouldn't be his last brush with death. Indeed, during his life, Churchill was prone to accidents, including crashing a plane while learning to fly, nearly drowning in a lake, falling several times from horses, and getting hit by a car while trying to cross New York's Fifth Avenue. Due to his poor grades at Harrow, it appeared Churchill's only chance at a career was through the army. It took Churchill 3 attempts to pass the exam for the Royal Military College at Sandhurst. Churchill described taking the Latin portion of the exam and leaving it completely blank except for his name, a number, a blot, and several smudges. His father had wanted him to be in the infantry, but his scores were only good enough for the cavalry. The new training at Sandhurst excited Churchill, and over the next 18 months, Churchill thrived. He recalled, "I was no longer handicapped by past neglect of Latin, French, or mathematics. We now had to learn fresh things, and we all started equal." Tactics, fortification, topography, military law, and military fortification formed the entire curriculum. In addition were drill, gymnastics, and riding. Churchill finished 20th out of 130 in his graduating class. Churchill craved action and showed no fear on the battlefront. Churchill knew that he was destined for great things, and he had to prove it to the world, and war provided the perfect opportunity to do so. Churchill served in the British Army, though only for a short time, from 1895 to 1899, and during the same time wrote military reports for newspapers, as well as 2 books: The Story of the Malacan Field Force and The River War. In 1899, Churchill stepped into politics, trying to win the Malacan Field Force and the River War. In 1899, Churchill stepped into politics, trying to win election to the House of Commons, but he failed. Without hesitation, he travelled to South Africa to cover Britain's war with the Boers as a London post-war correspondent. At the age of 25, Churchill arrived in Cape Town with 18 bottles of scotch and a guarantee of $150,000 in today's money for a 4-month assignment. One day, Churchill admitted to his brother, "There is no ambition I cherish so keenly as to gain a reputation for personal courage." He would soon get the chance to earn that reputation in South Africa. While covering the war, Churchill was aboard a train with soldiers sent on a reconnaissance mission. The train was suddenly ambushed by the enemy, and Churchill immediately sprung into action. Under fire, he acted like a decorated general and ordered the soldiers with him to flee to safety. Most of them did, but Churchill was captured as a prisoner of war and sent to Pretoria. Churchill's conditions in captivity, they could have been worse. The Boers allowed prisoners to buy cigarettes, beer, and newspapers, but Churchill hated every moment of it, feeling the opportunity for glory slipping him by. One night, with no real plan of how to make it out of 300 miles of enemy territory, he made a daring escape. A massive manhunt ensued, and the fugitive Churchill was wanted dead or alive. He avoided capture, travelling at night and drinking water from streams, and when he could go no further, he took a chance by knocking on a stranger's door. On the other side, he knew not whether there'd be friend or foe. Saved by pure chance or fate, it was an Englishman who answered. "I felt like a drowning man pulled out of the water," Churchill would recall. The Englishman was John Howard, a coal mine manager who hid Churchill in a pitch-black mine before he could be smuggled to safety. During this time in the mine, rats were Churchill's only company. In Britain, the story of an English lord's son escaping prison camp and humiliating the Boers was a boost to the nation. He became a hero and a celebrity pretty much overnight. A hero and a celebrity pretty much overnight. With a hero's welcome and newfound popularity, Churchill ran for office, and this time in 1900 he was elected as a Member of Parliament in the House of Commons. This was the start of a 55-year-long political career with the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows. Churchill once said, "Politics is almost as exciting as war and quite as dangerous. In war, you can only be killed once, but in politics, many times." Churchill was a conservative when he first stepped into the House of Commons, but he repeatedly clashed with his party on a number of issues. Free trade was crucial in his mind, and in 1904 it was his party's support of tariffs that made Churchill cross the floor to the opposing Liberal side. It infuriated his fellow Conservatives, but it proved to be great timing. The Liberals took control soon after. As a newfound Liberal, Churchill concerned himself with social reforms and laid the groundwork for the post-war welfare state. Churchill again ratted, or switched sides, back to the Conservative Party in 1925. The flippant politician was highly criticized for the moves, and he was seen as an untrustworthy opportunist.
Well, maybe. But I think, especially looking at politics today, it's so polarized. I think I tend to look more fondly on politicians in the middle than those on the outsides, on either side. And so it shows how he's kind of, not mindlessly following one party, but switching as he sees fit and as their policies change. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Churchill's greatest political failure, though, the one that nearly ruined his career, came in 1915. World War I was at a stalemate along the Western Front, with Allied troops engaged in deadly trench warfare. Anxious to end it, Britain's War Cabinet authorized a bold military attack. The mastermind of the 40-year-old First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill. The campaign would send troops over 1,000 miles to the east, establishing a second front to eventually seize Constantinople and take control of the sea route from Europe to Russia. The plan involved a naval attack through the Dardanelles Strait and then a land invasion on the Gallipoli Peninsula in modern-day Turkey. Lack of intelligence, incompetence, and hesitation by military commanders created the perfect storm, and the campaign went horribly wrong. Half of the ships were lost, and a bloodbath on the shores lasted 9 months. In all, 45,000 Allied troops and 65,000 Turkish troops lost their lives. Right or wrong, Churchill bore the brunt of this failure, and it forced his resignation from politics for a while. Churchill, he used this opportunity to return to the war front. The Gallipoli campaign haunted Churchill for decades. "Remember the Dardanelles" was a favorite taunt from political opponents throughout his career. A second controversy would plague Churchill for a decade and send him into political exile, a period known as the Wilderness Years. In 1929, a debate erupted over self-government in India, which was, at the time, under British rule. Churchill was no doubt an imperialist and was vehemently opposed. He also had no love for Gandhi. He saw him as a threat to the British Empire and went so far as to say,
Empire.
Gandhi should not be released on the account of a mere threat of fasting. We should be rid of a bad man and an enemy of the empire if he died. Except for the most right-wing of conservatives, Churchill was alone in his position. Much has been written about Winston Churchill the statesman, but what was the bulldog like at home? Who was he to his friends and his family? When Clementine Hosier met the 29-year-old Winston in 1904 at a dance, she wasn't impressed. He didn't ask her to dance, just stared, and never uttered one word.
Just stared.
And was very gauche. 4 years later, they would meet again at a dinner party, and this time a romance.
Hey, I'm not saying that I'm not an outgoing person. I'm very shy. I'm not making fun of that. I'm sure I'd be the same way. It's a funny visual.
And was very gauche. 4 years later, they would meet, just stared, and never uttered one word, and was very gauche. 4 years later, they would meet again at a dinner party, and this time a romance blossomed. The couple married in 1908 and would endure 57 years together until Winston's death at the age of 90. Even though Clementine's politics differed from Winston's, she was fiercely supportive and made standing by her man her #1 priority. She quietly advised him and was the only person who could reprimand his behavior. Clementine once said she would have loved to have been a statesman in her own right if she had been born with trousers rather than petticoats. Winston was overbearing and temperamental at times, but he was always transparent in his love for his wife, proudly boasting to Roosevelt, "I tell Clemmy everything." On occasion, the couple would fight, though. Money was a constant worry for Clementine, who was born into the aristocracy but wound up penniless in her youth. Winston overspent, enjoyed gambling.
Everything. Like military secrets?
Into the aristocracy, but wound up penniless in her youth. Winston overspent, enjoyed gambling, and was in and out of debt. During one particularly passionate dispute, Clementine famously threw a plate of spinach at her husband, but it missed. She also never really forgave him for buying the family home in Money Pit, Chartwell, doing so on the sly when she was laid up from giving birth. The couple had 5 children, but only 4 would survive into adulthood. Their 3rd child, Marigold, died at the age of 2.5 from septicemia, which is an infection of the blood. Unfortunately for her, this is a condition that modern-day antibiotics would easily cure. Clementine shrieked in anger like an animal in mortal pain upon her daughter's death. 1 year later, the Churchills' 4th child, Mary, was born. Winston, he was delighted to have the nursery in use again. Churchill's duties as a statesman often took him away from home, but he was devoted to his family. Determined to be different from his own parents, who were distant and cold, whenever he could, he doted upon his children. He built them a treehouse at the family home and used his skills as a bricklayer to construct a little summer house for Mary. Over 40 years at Chartwell, Churchill proudly improved the property by using his own hands, building ponds, structures, and bridges. The Churchills had a multitude of pets, domestic and exotic. Churchill was an animal lover his whole life. As a teen, in 1891, he even sold his bicycle to buy a bulldog named Dodo. At the family home, they had both cats and dogs, as well as pigs, fish, butterfly, sheep, horses, and black swans. There was even a parrot called Charlie, who it was rumored Churchill talked to squawk obscenities against Hitler and the Nazis, though this hasn't been proven and is most likely a myth. When not enamored with politics and acting as the savior of his country, Churchill was writing, painting, playing polo, laying bricks at the family home, or vacationing with friends in Monte Carlo or some other exotic locale. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender. If it wasn't for Hitler and the Nazis, Churchill may never have become Britain's Prime Minister. After losing his cabinet position in 1929, many believed Churchill's political career was over. Even though he was out of politics, he was not out of the public eye. He continued to write books, speeches, and newspaper articles, and warned of the dangers of Hitler. From his home in Kent, the predictions of the growing Nazi power and the quest for domination was coming true. He later wrote in his memoirs, "My warnings over the last 6 years had been so numerous, so detailed, and were now so terribly vindicated that no one could gainsay me." At the war's outbreak, then Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain brought Churchill back into the fray as Britain's First Lord of the Admiralty, the same position that he held during the First World War. Chamberlain had tried and failed to strike a peace deal with Hitler, and he showed himself to be incapable of turning the rapid tide of fascism. Chamberlain had also lost the support of his cabinet when British troops couldn't prevent the occupation of Norway in 1940. Chamberlain resigned, and Churchill took over as Prime Minister at the darkest hour. That same day, May the 10th, Hitler invaded Holland, Belgium, and the Netherlands.
Chamberlain. All right, Hitler, don't take that. All right, you can take the Sudetenland. All right, just don't take. All right, he took it. Just don't take. Wait, you're fired.
Churchill was a brilliant orator. Thanks to his mastery of words, he inspired his countrymen to fight, and some of his speeches during the early days of the war are some of the most powerful in the English language. Victory was the only option. He never even considered defeat, even when the outlook looked most grim. When France fell to the Nazis, Britain was alone in its fight. Churchill knew his island nation could not win the war alone. He would need the United States. And when Germany...
I always think, and I don't mean this as like a... It's just a fact of reality. I always thought like the most happy person after hearing about Pearl Harbor must have been Winston Churchill, because that sounds terrible. But do you know what I mean? Like it means, okay, America is definitely in now. Let's go see if they can join us and help in Europe. You know,
he invaded Russia.
That sounded worse than I intended it to sound.
Churchill saw an opportunity to forge an unlikely alliance. Britain came to Stalin's end, and Churchill defended the decision during this desperate time, saying, "No one has been a more consistent opponent of communism for the last 25 years. I will unsay no word I have spoken about it, but all this fades away before the spectacle which is now unfolding. The past, with its crimes, its follies, its tragedies, flashes away. The Russian danger is therefore our danger, and the danger of the United States, just as the cause of any Russian fighting for hearth and house is the cause of free men and free peoples in every quarter of the globe. To forge the big men...
I always, I say this a lot, I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but it's so crazy to me how, after World War I, was still in everyone's mind, and it seemed like, and all of these grudges and whatnot. But after World War II, it just went like, and which was even worse than World War I in terms of the scale, just went, okay, now communism is the evil, Stalin's evil. And it just shows how big of a deal, the communist versus capitalist thought, and like people have nukes now. It's just, it changed so quickly to like, oh God, World War, we beat Hitler, beat Japan, and now it's just all attention on Russia and communism.
And free peoples in every quarter of the globe. To forge the Big Three alliance, Churchill cultivated a friendship with the American president Franklin D. Roosevelt. This was something that would convince him to join the war effort. He invited himself to the White House and arrived 2 weeks after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The Prime Minister stayed 3 weeks, through Christmas and well past his welcome in Eleanor Roosevelt's eyes. But it was absolutely critical to solidifying their alliance and winning over the Americans. The two bonded over daily lunches and late-night strategizing.
Oh, that wasn't Yalta, was it?
By the time he left, FDR found that he missed his friend and sent a note to Churchill in London which read, "It is fun to be in the same decade with you." With the Americans now in the war and the Russians fighting on the side of the Allies, Hitler's armies were pushed back, and victory was declared on May the 8th, 1945 in Europe. 3 months later in the East, Japan surrendered, marking the end of World War II. In a surprise that very same year, Churchill did not win re-election. Following the war, Churchill continued to influence world affairs. He gave his speech on the Iron Curtain about the USSR threat and was strongly in favor of Britain's independence from the European coal and steel community, which was set up after the war to neutralize European competition for natural resources. Churchill actually served as Prime Minister again in 1951 and resigned at the age of 80. It was at this time that he was in deteriorating health. Churchill was intent on leaving his mark on history not just through clamoring for fame and power or placing himself at the center of the action. Indeed, he would write his own story and solidify a favorable view to be passed through the ages. At the end of World War II, Churchill wrote his best-selling series, The Second World War, and won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953. In that same year, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. In 1965, after suffering a stroke 2 weeks earlier, Winston Churchill passed from this life until the next. It seems the whole world felt the loss, and reporters remarked that it was the end of an era. The Queen saw to it that Churchill's funeral was the grandest of any commoner since 1852, which was on a scale befitting his position in history. His body lay in state.
What happened in 1852?
Westminster Hall for 3 days and nights, and no fewer than 320,000 people filed past to pay their respects. And as we move towards the end of this video, let me mention something interesting. 10 years ago, a fifth of all British teenagers polled believed Churchill to be a fictional character. His legend indeed may seem larger than life, and knowing the man, apart from his greatest moment on the world stage, is harder to grasp. To say he was complex and contradictory is an understatement. We know he held himself in the highest regard, but Churchill also suffered in the depths of depression. He referred to it as his black dog. His stubbornness, courage, grit, and brilliance with words made him indispensable, and his legacy is one that will live on and inspire the good fight. And no doubt, Churchill will continue to be judged and analysed through the ages for his failed decisions and unpopular attitudes. He was a product of the time with an impossible job. Statesmen are not called upon to settle easy questions. These often settle themselves. It is where the balance quivers and the proportions are veiled in mist that the opportunity for world-saving decisions presents itself. So I really hope you enjoyed that episode of Biographics. If you did, there's a couple of things you could do right now. One is hit that like button.
Awesome video, awesome channel. I learned a lot of respect for Winston Churchill. I'd like to learn more about him. Yeah, I think I'm going to watch the Margaret Thatcher one as well. Love Biographics. All right, see you guys next time.